The summer of 1875 baked the Colorado frontier into a brittle, brown crisp. It was a tinderbox of a season, where a single stray spark on the wind could devour 1,000 acres before you even smelled the smoke. For Rebecca Collins, a widow fighting tooth and nail to keep her husband's trading post from turning to dust along with him, survival was a daily brawl with the elements. But on one blistering July afternoon, when a pillar of black smoke clawed at the eastern sky, she didn't know she was riding straight toward a choice that would burn her old life to the ground. She had no idea that pulling two terrified children from the heart of a wagon fire would be the easy part. She couldn't possibly imagine that this single act of mercy would bring their father, the most feared Comanche war chief on the plains, to her door, and that he wouldn't be coming alone. Before we dive into the heart of the fire, do us a favor and hit that subscribe button. We pour our hearts into bringing you stories like this, and every single click tells us we're doing it right. Now let's get back to the moment everything changed. The sun was a hammer, and Rebecca's trading post was the anvil. She swiped a soaked handkerchief across her brow, the gesture useless against the relentless heat. At 34, she'd buried a husband and planted her feet firm in this unforgiving soil. But this summer felt different. It felt personal, like the land itself was trying to break her. "Gonna be another scorcher, Miss Rebecca," called Samuel Jackson, the old Buffalo soldier who ran her stable. His voice was gravelly, worn smooth by years on the plains. Thermometers already kissing 95. She just nodded, her eyes on the pale, merciless sky. The creek was down again. The land was thirsty, and so were the people on it. That's when she heard it. Hoofbeats, fast ones. Her hand went to the Winchester that was never more than an arm's length away. In this part of the country, a visitor was rarely just a visitor. They were either a blessing or a curse, and you had to be ready for either. The rider was Marshall Hayes, a rancher from 10 miles west. He didn't even say hello. He rode his horse straight to the trough, letting the exhausted animal drink its fill before he swung a leg over. His face, caked in dust, was a mask of grim news. "Army's on the move," he said, his voice raspy. "Lieutenant Warren and 30 men. They're tracking a Comanche band that hit the Stebbins place." Rebecca's stomach tightened. "Casualties." "Stebbins took an arrow. He'll live." Hayes took the dipper of water she offered and drank deep. "Warren says it's Thunderhorse himself." The name dropped into the blistering air and seemed to suck all the heat out of it. Thunderhorse. He wasn't just a chief. He was a legend, a ghost who rode the plains, refusing to be broken, refusing to be caged on a reservation. The Army said he was educated, that he'd studied their ways before turning his back on them, which made him twice as dangerous. He knew how they thought. He knew how they fought. "Which way they headed?" Rebecca asked, trying to sound calm. "Nowhere near here," Hayes said, but his words were no comfort. A man like Thunderhorse could be anywhere. He was the whisper on the wind, the shadow in the long grass. After Hayes left, a deep unease settled over the trading post. The place felt smaller, more fragile. Her little log building, packed with tools and fabric and ammunition, felt like a ship adrift in a vast, dangerous ocean. Later that afternoon, Dr. William Foster stopped by on his monthly circuit. He was a good man, the one who'd sat with her for 3 days while her husband Daniel's fever raged, the one who told her to stay and fight for her life here instead of running back east. "Heard about the Comanche?" he asked, his kind eyes full of worry. "Hayes brought the news," she said. "Thunderhorse." Foster nodded grimly. "The reservation supplies are late again. 3 months late. A man can't watch his children starve, Rebecca. Not any man." He had a way of seeing the other side of things, a rare quality out here. He saw people, not just savages. But as he rode off toward the east, his words echoed in her mind. It didn't matter why Thunderhorse was riding. It only mattered that he was. As dusk fell, Rebecca barred the heavy door and checked the loads in her rifle and Daniel's old revolver. The rituals of survival had become second nature. She'd just settled down with a book, a tattered collection of essays that felt like a relic from another life, when she smelled it. Smoke, not wood smoke from her stove. This was the smell of trouble, acrid and hungry. She went to the eastern window and saw it. a hellish orange glow pulsing against the darkening sky. An angry wound on the horizon. Fire, the settler's waking nightmare. In a drought this bad, a prairie fire could outrun a horse. It could swallow your whole world in a single roaring breath. She didn't hesitate. Daniel would have ridden toward the smoke. So would she. She saddled her mare, her movements quick and sure. She grabbed canteens, blankets, and her rifle. "You ain't thinking of riding toward that, Miss Rebecca?" Samuel said, his voice thick with alarm. "Someone might need help," she called back, swinging into the saddle. As she galloped east, the smoke thickened into a choking shroud. Her horse snorted, its eyes wide with fear. Rebecca pulled a bandana over her face and pressed on, her own eyes streaming. When she crested a low rise, she saw it. A trader's wagon completely engulfed in flames. The fire was chewing through the dry wood, spitting embers into the surrounding grass. The horses were gone, taken, or maybe they'd broken free and bolted. It was a scene of total destruction. There was nothing to save. She was about to turn back, to flee the suffocating heat and the sight of such ruin, when she heard it. A sound that cut through the roar of the fire. Crying. It wasn't coming from the wagon. It was coming from a shallow ravine just beyond it. She dismounted, tying her mare far from the flames. Soaking a canvas tarp with precious water, she draped it over her head and shoulders and circled the inferno. The crying grew louder, punctuated by small, desperate coughs. The ravine was acting like a bowl, filling with the thick, oily smoke. And there, huddled against the dirt bank, were two small figures. Children, dark-haired, dark-eyed. Comanche. They were no older than 5 or 6. Twins, a boy and a girl, their faces streaked with tears and soot. They recoiled as she slid down into the ravine, their terror palpable. They were cornered, trapped between a wall of fire and a strange white woman. "I'm here to help," she said, holding out her hands, trying to make her voice gentle. The boy's arm was held at an odd angle, clearly injured. The girl, though terrified, stared at Rebecca with an unnerving intelligence, assessing her, judging her. There was no time. The smoke was getting thicker by the second. Rebecca took a gamble. She moved slowly, then scooped the injured boy into her arms. He was too weak from the smoke to fight back. The girl watched her for a beat, her mind racing. Then, with a resolve that seemed far too old for her small body, she grabbed the hem of Rebecca's skirt and held on tight. Climbing out of that ravine, carrying a child and leading another, was a struggle against gravity and fear. Adrenaline was a fire in her own veins. She got them to her horse, calming the nervous animal as she lifted the children into the saddle, the boy in front, the girl clinging on behind him. She mounted up behind them both, a strange, desperate family of 3, and spurred the mare away from the burning wreckage. As they rode, the wagon behind them collapsed with a deafening roar, sending a fountain of sparks into the night sky. The boy was trembling, his breathing ragged and shallow. The girl kept looking back, scanning the horizon as if expecting to be followed. Copper Springs was too far. The boy wouldn't make it. Her trading post was closer. It was the only choice. "You're safe now," she whispered, not knowing if they understood the words, only hoping they understood the tone. "I'll take care of you." But as she rode west, a cold dread began to seep into her bones. What had she done? These weren't just any children. If they belonged to Thunder Horse's band, their absence would not go unnoticed. And when he came looking for them, what would he find? What fresh hell had she just invited to her own front door? By the time she reached the trading post, darkness had completely fallen. Samuel rushed out, his face a mask of concern that quickly melted into pure shock. "Sweet Jesus, Miss Rebecca," he breathed, staring at the Comanche children. "What have you done?" "They were trapped," she said, her voice sharp with exhaustion, as she dismounted and carefully lifted the semi-conscious boy down. "I couldn't just leave them to die, Samuel." The old soldier just shook his head, his face grim. "No, ma'am, you couldn't. But this is going to bring a storm down on us." She knew he was right, but the boy's labored breathing was a more immediate problem. She carried him inside, the little girl still clutching her skirt like a lifeline, her knuckles white. Rebecca laid the boy on her own bed and got her first good look at his arm. A nasty gash ran from his wrist to his elbow, seared by the fire. It needed cleaning, bandaging, and a prayer to ward off infection. She worked quickly, her hands steady, while the little girl watched her every move with an unnerving intensity. When she finished with the boy, she turned to the girl. "Let me check you for injuries." The girl backed away, shaking her head. And then she spoke, her English heavily accented, but shockingly clear. "Brother first, help him." Rebecca was stunned. "I have. He needs to rest." "Are you hurt?" The girl pointed to the water pitcher. "Thirsty. Brother thirsty." Rebecca brought them water, helping the boy take small sips. He was starting to come around, his dark eyes fluttering open. As she tended to them, she tried again. "My name is Rebecca." She touched her chest. The girl studied her for a long, silent moment before replying. "I am Rising Star." She pointed to her brother. "He is Swift Arrow. Our father is a great chief." A cold knot formed in Rebecca's stomach. She had to ask. "Thunder Horse?" she whispered. The girl's eyes widened, just for a second, then narrowed. She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. "You know our father?" "I know of him," Rebecca answered, the understatement of the century. Her mind was reeling. She was sheltering the children of the most wanted man in the territory. The story tumbled out of Rising Star in broken pieces. Kidnapped by bad men in a wagon. Locked in a box, a fight, a fire. The men ran. They escaped the box and hid in the ravine. Then you came. Kidnappers. That explained the traitor's wagon. Someone had attacked them. Maybe Thunder Horse's own warriors. Maybe someone else entirely. But it didn't matter. The trail of the missing children now ended here, at her door. "Your father," Rebecca said, her voice barely a whisper. "He'll be looking for you." Rising Star's chin lifted with an absolute, unshakable faith. "Father will come. Father will find us." Swift Arrow began to mutter in a feverish delirium. His sister was at his side in an instant, her soft Comanche words a soothing balm that calmed him back into a restless sleep. The boy's fever was climbing. Rebecca brewed a bitter tea from willow bark, her hands moving on instinct. She was a healer now, a protector, a kidnapper, a traitor, all in the span of a few hours. As she gently spooned the medicine into the boy, Rising Star watched her with those ancient, knowing eyes. "Why you help us, Wes?" the girl asked. "White women fear Comanche." The question was a spear, aimed right at the heart of the matter. Rebecca looked from the sleeping boy to the fiercely protective girl. "Because you are children," she said, the simple truth of it cutting through all the fear and complication. "And you needed help." This seemed to be the right answer. Rising Star gave a solemn nod. Then she asked another question that caught Rebecca completely off guard. "You have children?" The old familiar ache twisted in Rebecca's gut. "No," she said softly. "My husband died before we could." "You are alone," Rising Star stated, not as a question, but as a fact. "Alone is dangerous." Rebecca almost smiled. "Sometime," she said, "we don't get to choose." As the night wore on, Swift Arrow's fever spiked. Rebecca worked tirelessly, bathing his small, hot body with cool cloths, while Rising Star sat by his head, chanting a soft, melodic song that sounded like a prayer. The world shrank to the size of that small room, to the sound of a sick child's breathing and a sister's hopeful song. Then a sharp rap on the connecting door shattered the quiet. It was Samuel. His voice was a low, urgent whisper. "Marshal Hayes just rode back in. Says the army changed direction. They found the burned wagon. They're heading this way." The walls of the room seemed to press in on her. "Lieutenant Warren, he was coming here. If he found Thunder Horse's children in her care, it wouldn't be a rescue. It would be an act of war." "Ride for Dr. Foster," she told Samuel, her mind racing. "Tell him I need him, urgently." She paused, making a decision that felt like stepping off a cliff. "And Samuel, don't tell Hayes about the children. If the army got to them first, they would become pawns, leverage, hostages. If Thunder Horse got to them first, she didn't want to imagine the consequences. She was trapped between two armies, with two small lives in the balance. Looking down at the sleeping twins, a fierce, primal protectiveness washed over her. She didn't regret it. She wouldn't. Their lives were worth the risk. Outside, the vast, dark prairie held its breath. Somewhere in that darkness, a father was hunting for his children. A lieutenant was hunting for his enemy. And she, Rebecca Collins, was standing right in the middle, a lightning rod in a gathering storm. "Your father will find you," she whispered to the children. But now it wasn't a comfort. It was a countdown. Dawn was a dirty smudge in a smoke-stained sky. Rebecca hadn't slept. She'd sat vigil, a rifle across her lap, watching Swift Arrow's fever finally break in the cool pre-dawn hours. When Rising Star woke, she looked first at her brother, then at Rebecca. "He is better," she said, a simple statement of fact. "Your medicine helped." Rebecca managed a tired smile. Just as she was preparing a bowl of cornmeal mush, Samuel's urgent knock came again. His face was a thundercloud. "Riders," he said, his voice a low rumble. "From the east. Army patrol." Her stomach plummeted. "Lieutenant Warren?" Samuel's grim nod was all the answer she needed. 10 men with him. They'll be here in 15 minutes. Her mind kicked into high gear. There was only one option. "Take Rising Star to the storm cellar," she ordered Samuel. "Swift Arrow is too sick to move. I'll have to hide him in plain sight." "Miss Rebecca, if they find you hiding them—" "I'm not hiding them, Samuel. I'm caring for them." The distinction was everything. She knelt down to Rising Star, whose face was a mask of stoic fear. "Soldiers are coming. It's safer if you go with Samuel. I will protect your brother." The girl looked at the sick boy on the bed, then back at Rebecca. A silent, desperate negotiation passed between them. Finally, she nodded. "You protect Swift Arrow." "With my life," Rebecca promised, and the words tasted like a sacred vow. She worked frantically, covering Swift Arrow with a heavy quilt, arranging the pillows to obscure his face. He could be the son of a traveler, sick with a prairie fever. It was a flimsy story, but it was all she had. She had just finished when the thunder of hoofbeats rolled into the yard. She smoothed her apron, took a deep breath, and walked out to meet the storm. Lieutenant James Warren was a man carved from granite and arrogance. His uniform was crisp, his gaze cold, his presence an immediate violation of her home. "Mrs. Collins," he said, his voice as sharp as a newly honed blade, "we're tracking Comanche hostiles." "Lieutenant," she replied, her own voice level, calm, "what brings you to my door?" His eyes narrowed. "Marshal Hayes mentioned you sent for a doctor. We thought it prudent to check on your welfare." It was a lie, and they both knew it. He wasn't here for her welfare. He was sniffing for a trail. "As you can see, Lieutenant, I am quite well." He wasn't ready to leave. His eyes swept the room, cataloging everything. "Heard you saw some trouble yesterday," he said, his tone deceptively casual. "A fire to the east?" "A burned wagon," she confirmed, keeping her heart from hammering against her ribs. "No survivors." "Interesting," Warren said, his eyes locking onto hers. "We found that same wagon. Evidence suggests it was transporting special cargo." He let the words hang in the air. 2 Comanche children, belonging to Chief Thunderhorse. He was watching her, waiting for a flinch, a flicker of an eye. "Tracks led this way before we lost them." She met his gaze without blinking. "I saw no one, Lieutenant." The lie was a bitter pill, but she swallowed it down. Just as he seemed about to press her, a small, muffled cough came from the back room. Warren's head snapped toward the sound. "Someone ill?" he demanded. The moment she had dreaded was here. "A traveler's son," she said, the lie coming more easily this time. "He has a fever. His father is in the stable with the horses." Before Warren could challenge her story, one of his soldiers appeared at the door. "Lieutenant, we found tracks out back. Small prints. Could be children." The air crackled. Warren's polite facade vanished, replaced by cold, hard authority. "Mrs. Collins, I am ordering a search of these premises." "Lieutenant, I have cooperated." "This is not a request, ma'am," he snarled, his hand dropping to the butt of his pistol. "If you are harboring enemies of the United States, that is treason." His men started for the back room. Rebecca moved to block their path. "The boy in there is gravely ill," she said, her voice shaking with a rage she couldn't suppress. "Move aside, Mrs. Collins," Warren ordered. She stood her ground. "I will not." For a heart-stopping second, she thought he was going to have her physically removed. Then a new voice cut through the tension, calm and authoritative. Lieutenant Warren, I suggest you reconsider. Dr. Foster stood in the doorway, his medical bag in hand, his face a mask of stern disapproval. When you threaten a woman for providing medical care to a child, it becomes my concern. Warren was furious, but the doctor's presence changed the equation. This was no longer just an isolated widow. It was a respected physician, an officer of the community. We have reason to believe she is harboring the children of Thunderhorse, Warren bit out. Dr. Foster was unmoved. And if she were, treating their injuries would be a moral obligation, not a crime. After a tense negotiation, a compromise was reached. The doctor would examine his patient, with Warren observing. They entered the back room. The moment Warren saw Swift Arrow, a flash of triumph lit his eyes. His hand flew to his pistol. "Lieutenant!" Dr. Foster's voice was a whip crack. "You will not threaten a patient under my care." Warren froze, but his face was a snarl of victory. "That's Thunderhorse's son," he hissed. "Where's the other one? The girl?" Before Rebecca could even think of a reply, a shout erupted from the main room. Chaos. The distinctive, terrifying click of a rifle hammer being pulled back. Warren spun around, his own pistol drawn, and charged back into the store. Rebecca and the doctor were right behind him. The scene was a tableau of imminent violence. Samuel stood near the door, his old Sharps rifle leveled at a young soldier. And between them, small and defiant, stood Rising Star. She had tried to sneak back from the cellar. "Lower your weapon, old man," Warren barked. Samuel didn't budge. "Not letting you take this child, Lieutenant." The tension was a lit fuse. One wrong move, one twitchy finger, and blood would soak the floorboards of her home. "Everyone, lower your weapons!" Dr. Foster boomed, stepping into the middle of the standoff. "For God's sake, there are children here!" His voice of reason broke the spell. Slowly, Samuel lowered his rifle. Rising Star ran to Rebecca, burying her face in her skirts. Warren looked from the girl to the boy in the back room, a cruel smile twisting his lips. He had them, both of them. "This is quite a situation you've created, Mrs. Collins," he said, his voice dripping with venom. "I didn't create anything," she shot back, her arm protectively around Rising Star. "I refuse to let children die." "A noble sentiment," Warren sneered. "Unfortunately, it conflicts with my orders. These children are valuable leverage. They will be transported to Fort Carson." His plan was monstrously simple. He would hold the children, and he would wait for their father to come for them. "We're counting on him attempting a rescue," Warren said, his voice cold as a grave. "It will save us the trouble of hunting him down." He wasn't just taking them hostage. He was using them as bait. And her trading post, her home, was about to become the bloodiest trap on the frontier. The departure of Lieutenant Warren and the main patrol didn't bring relief. It brought a new, suffocating kind of dread. He left two soldiers behind, Sergeant Mills and Corporal Davis, to turn her home into a prison. They were polite but firm, their presence a constant armed reminder that she was no longer in control of her own life. The trading post, once a symbol of her independence, now felt like a cage. Dr. Foster stayed, insisting he was medically obligated to monitor Swift Arrow. In truth, he was her only ally, a steady presence against the coming storm. The boy was improving, his fever down, but he was weak. Rising Star refused to leave his side, a tiny, silent sentinel guarding her brother with a fierceness that broke Rebecca's heart. As they washed dishes that evening, out of earshot of the guards, Rebecca asked the question that had been haunting her. "Will he really come, William?" "Thunderhorse." The doctor's face was grim. "He's a father, Rebecca. He's been half mad with grief since they were taken. He'll come." He told her what he knew of the chief. Educated, ruthless, a brilliant tactician, but above all, a widower whose entire world revolved around the two children sleeping in the next room. He wasn't just a monster from a campfire story. He was a man who was about to walk into a slaughter. "Warren is using them as bait," she whispered, the words tasting like poison. "What happens when Thunderhorse finds that out?" The doctor had no answer. There was no good outcome here, only varying degrees of tragedy. As darkness fell, a fragile peace settled over the post. Rebecca tucked a blanket around Rising Star, who had finally drifted off to sleep. "Your father will find you," she whispered, the words now a prayer for a miracle. Before she slept, the little girl had looked up at her eyes full of a question that still echoed in Rebecca's mind. "Why you help us? Soldiers, your people." "They're not my people when they use children as weapons," Rebecca had answered, the truth of it solid and heavy in her chest. Right is right, wrong is wrong. The girl's sleepy reply had chilled her to the bone. "Father says the same. He is wisest, strongest, and most dangerous when he is angry." Rebecca moved to the window, peering out into the vast, silent darkness. The prairie stretched out like an empty sea, but she knew it wasn't empty. He was out there. A father, a chief, a storm gathering on the horizon. And then she saw them. Just for a second. Three dark shapes on horseback at the very edge of the clearing, their silhouettes barely visible against the star-dusted sky. They melted back into the shadows as quickly as they appeared. It wasn't her imagination. Scouts. He wasn't just coming. He was already here, watching, waiting. The trap was set. The bait was in place. And now the tiger was circling. Sleep was impossible. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of wind in the dry grass sounded like an approaching warrior. In the deepest hour of the night, Swift Arrow suddenly sat bolt upright in bed. His eyes were wide, alert, and he began speaking rapidly in Comanche. Rising Star was awake in an instant, her hand over his mouth, whispering urgently. They were communicating, their heads turned toward the window where Rebecca had seen the riders. A moment later, a sound drifted from the darkness. The call of a night bird. 3 notes, then 2. It was a perfect mimicry, but the children's reaction gave it away. It was a signal. Rising Star padded to the window and repeated the call, a perfect echo. "He's here," Rebecca whispered to Dr. Foster, who was now awake and watching with alarm. "He's communicating with them." "Warren's trap is working," the doctor said grimly. "We can't let it happen," Rebecca said, a sudden, fierce clarity cutting through her fear. "They don't deserve to watch their father walk into an ambush." Sergeant Mills appeared in the doorway, his rifle at the ready. "What's all the whispering?" "The boy's fever broke," Dr. Foster said smoothly. "We were just discussing his improvement." The sergeant grunted, unconvinced, but retreated to his post. The moment he was gone, Rebecca leaned in. "We have to get them out of here." The doctor's eyes widened. "Rebecca, that's treason." "I don't care what they call it," she hissed. "It's the right thing to do." Rising Star had been listening, her young face a mask of concentration. "Father waiting," she whispered. "Many warriors. No fight if children are safe." The plan began to form in frantic, whispered pieces. A diversion, a window of opportunity. But how? Swift Arrow was still too weak to run. Dr. Foster suggested a medical emergency, something to distract the guards. But Rising Star shook her head. "Soldiers do not help. Soldiers shoot." Then Corporal Davis, the younger, more reluctant guard, came in to ask for coffee. And in that simple request, Rebecca saw a terrible, dangerous opportunity. She had laudanum, a powerful sedative, enough to put the soldiers to sleep, to buy them the time they needed. It was a horrifying choice. Drugging federal soldiers was a capital offense, but the alternative was a bloodbath, with the children caught right in the middle. Dr. Foster saw the direction of her thoughts. Without a word, he slipped a small brown bottle from his medical bag and passed it to her. Their eyes met, a silent pact made in the flickering lamplight. She went to the stove, her hands trembling as she brewed the coffee. This wasn't just a pot of coffee. It was a betrayal, a crime, a prayer for peace. She poured a heavy dose of the laudanum into the pot, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She carried the tray out, her face a neutral mask. "Strong brew," Sergeant Mills grunted after taking a deep swallow. "Frontier coffee," she replied, her voice miraculously steady. "Keeps a person alert." The irony was a bitter taste in her mouth. Minutes later, the drug began to work. Corporal Davis was the first to go, slumping over the counter in a deep, unnatural sleep. Mills fought it, his training warring with the potent sedative. He staggered to his feet, his rifle wavering. You did something, he slurred, his eyes wild with suspicion. Drugged us. For your own safety, Sergeant, she said, just as his eyes rolled back and he collapsed into his chair. They were down. Both of them. The path was clear. It won't last long, she told the doctor. An hour, maybe two. They moved fast. Water, bandages, food for the journey. Swift Arrow, drawing on some hidden reserve of a chief's pride, insisted on standing, his small body trembling with effort. We go now, Rising Star said. Father waiting. Rebecca led them toward the back door. The pre-dawn air was still and cold. They were just about to step outside when a figure appeared from the shadows of the stable. It was Samuel. His face was etched with panic. Miss Rebecca, riders coming. From the east. It's Warren's patrol, and they're riding hard. The world tilted on its axis. Their hour of time had just shrunk to minutes. They were out of options, out of time. Rising Star let out a series of urgent bird calls. The response was immediate from all around the clearing. Father says run, she translated, her voice tight with fear. Run to the lightning tree. Warriors will cover us. The lightning tree, a massive skeletal cottonwood 100 yards across open ground. It was a death run. A single rifle shot echoed from the trading post. One of the soldiers was awake, then another. Shouts cut through the dawn air. Run! Rebecca screamed, pushing the children forward. Don't stop! They ran, a desperate, stumbling flight across the open prairie. Rising Star half-dragged her brother, whose strength was failing fast. Rebecca turned back and saw Corporal Davis at the edge of the garden, his rifle raised, his face a mess of confusion and duty. Mrs. Collins, stop! She didn't hesitate. She ran straight at him, deliberately placing herself between his rifle and the fleeing children. At that exact moment, a lone rider emerged from the tree line. Majestic, fearless, Thunder Horse. He rode not like a man, but like a force of nature, his paint stallion eating up the ground between him and his children. Davis, his training kicking in, shifted his aim from Rebecca to the chief. Instinct took over. Rebecca lunged, grabbing the rifle barrel, forcing it skyward. Don't! She screamed. Just then, Warren's patrol crested the rise, a wave of uniformed fury. Take aim! Warren's voice ripped through the air. Fire on the hostiles! Time stopped. The children were still in the open. Thunder Horse was a perfect target. A volley of rifle fire would cut them all to pieces. Rebecca didn't think. She acted. She ran. Out into the open field, straight into the line of fire. She heard Samuel shouting her name, a cry of pure anguish. But she didn't stop. She ran until she was standing directly between the soldiers' guns and the Comanche chief, who had just scooped his children onto his horse. She was a human shield, a lone, defenseless woman daring an entire army patrol to shoot through her to get to them. For a moment that stretched into eternity, no one moved. The world was a frozen tableau. The furious lieutenant, the line of ready rifles, the defiant chief with his children, and Rebecca standing between them, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. Warren's voice, choked with disbelief, broke the silence. Hold your fire! What in God's name? Thunder Horse's dark eyes locked onto hers. His expression was impossible to read. Gratitude, astonishment, respect. Go, she choked out, her voice a ragged whisper. I'll hold them. He leaned down from his horse, his voice low and clear, his English perfect. You have the heart of a Comanche mother, he said. My children live because of you. Then he wheeled his horse and galloped toward the safety of the trees, his warriors melting out of the shadows to cover his retreat. They vanished as if they were never there. Rebecca was left standing alone in the field as Lieutenant Warren and his men swarmed around her, their faces masks of rage and confusion. Mrs. Collins, Warren spat, dismounting and storming toward her. You have interfered with a military operation. You have aided the enemy. You are under arrest for treason. He said the word like a death sentence because it was. I prevented a massacre, Lieutenant, she replied, her voice surprisingly steady. Where are my men? He demanded, his eyes blazing. Sleeping, she answered honestly. They'll be fine. His hand went to his pistol. The penalty for treason is death, Mrs. Collins. Dr. Foster and Samuel had reached her side, flanking her like loyal guards. That penalty is determined by a trial, Lieutenant, the doctor said coolly, not by a field execution. Warren's jaw tightened, but he knew the doctor was right. He couldn't just shoot her. Not here, not now. Consider yourself under house arrest, he snarled. Then he leaned in close, his voice a venomous whisper. Thunderhorse will see this as weakness. He will be emboldened. Every settler his band kills from now on, their blood is on your hands. He turned and stomped back toward the trading post, shouting orders. Rebecca stood frozen, the weight of his words pressing down on her. Had she saved 2 lives only to endanger dozens more? Then Samuel pointed toward the tree line. A single rider had emerged once more. Thunderhorse. He sat on his stallion, a lone silhouette against the rising sun. He raised his hand, not in a threat, but in a clear, unmistakable gesture of salute, acknowledgement, respect. Then he was gone. Well now, Samuel breathed, that's something you don't see every day. She was a traitor in the eyes of the army, a criminal facing a hangman's noose. But in that moment, watching the spot where the chief had been, she knew she had done the right thing. The consequences would be dire. Her life as she knew it was over. But as Warren's men secured her home, turning it into her prison, she felt a strange, defiant peace. She had faced down the United States Army for 2 children she didn't know. Whatever came next, she would face it with the same conviction. For 3 weeks, the trading post was her world and her jail. Corporal Davis and 3 other soldiers were her constant shadows. Business trickled on, with Samuel handling the customers under the watchful eyes of the guards. Dr. Foster was her only link to the outside world, bringing news and a quiet, steady reassurance that she wasn't entirely alone. The story had spread. Newspapers in Denver were writing about the frontier widow who chose compassion over military orders. It had become a political issue, a debate about how the territory should handle the native tribes. Her simple act of mercy had become a flashpoint in a much larger war. Then one afternoon, the deputies on guard suddenly tensed. 3 Comanche men had ridden into the clearing. They were not painted for war. They carried no rifles. They walked into the trading post, their presence radiating a quiet power that made the soldiers grip their weapons tighter. The lead warrior spoke in perfect English. We bring a message and a payment of debt for the medicine woman. That's what they were calling her now. The medicine woman. The soldiers refused them entry, but Dr. Foster, who had arrived just moments before, stepped in. As her physician, I can accept items on her behalf. The Comanche warrior nodded and presented the gifts. Buffalo robes from the chief's own lodge. Rare healing herbs from a sacred canyon. A hunting knife forged by Thunderhorse himself. And last, a small, intricately beaded deerskin pouch. The chief says give this to the medicine woman's hands only, the warrior said. It contains an eagle's blessing. But it was his final message that silenced the entire room. He swept his gaze over the soldiers, his voice low and deadly serious. Chief Thunderhorse says this: the woman who stands between children and bullets has the protection of the Comanche people. Any who harm her will answer to him. It wasn't a gift. It was a declaration, a warning. She was no longer just a settler. She was under the personal protection of their most powerful enemy. Later, Dr. Foster brought her the gifts. The knife had been confiscated, but he had the pouch. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside was a small, exquisitely carved eagle, each feather perfect. And folded beneath it was a piece of paper. The handwriting was elegant, educated. The debt for my children's lives cannot be repaid, but know you have my gratitude. The eagle watches over those with courage. When the moon is dark, look to the lightning tree. It was a signature, a simple, powerful TH, an offer, a meeting. He was reaching out, not with weapons, but with words. Her situation had just become infinitely more complicated and infinitely more dangerous. That night, Samuel came to her window. Marshal Jenkins is riding out from Denver tomorrow. With 15 men, they're taking you to trial. Why so many men? She whispered. Samuel's face was grim in the moonlight. They intercepted a message. They think Thunder Horse's warriors are going to try and free you on the trail. It was a disaster. Any attack would start a full-blown war. She had to warn him. But how? The meeting at the lightning tree was days away. Too late. The only chance she had was a desperate one. A message. A risk. She wrote a quick, simple note, begging him not to interfere, signing it Medicine Woman and drawing a small eagle. Samuel, using a mix of charm and quiet persuasion, convinced a conflicted Corporal Davis to accidentally drop the note on his patrol route where Comanche scouts were sure to find it. The next morning, as she waited for the marshal, she saw them. Lined up on the ridge just beyond her property line, 30 Comanche warriors on horseback, silent and still as statues. At their center was Thunder Horse. They weren't attacking. They were watching, bearing witness. When Marshal Jenkins arrived, he took in the scene with a single sweeping glance. "Interesting, welcoming committee," he said dryly. As his men helped her into the transport wagon, Thunder Horse raised his hand in that same gesture of salute, and without thinking, she raised her own in return. She was a prisoner, on her way to be tried for her life. But as the wagon rolled east, she felt the unseen eyes of 30 warriors watching her back. She had an army on one side, a war band on the other, and her life hanging precariously in the balance between them. The Denver courthouse was a cold, imposing fortress of law, designed to make a person feel small and guilty before they even spoke a word. After 2 weeks in a dank city jail, Rebecca stood before its stone steps, escorted by Marshal Jenkins, who, to her surprise, had treated her with a gruff, impartial respect. Dr. Foster was waiting with a lawyer, a sharp-eyed man named Edward Chambers, who specialized in the bloody, tangled mess of frontier justice. In the courtroom, the air was thick with hostility. Lieutenant Warren was there, his face a mask of cold fury, surrounded by other officers. He was the prosecution's star witness, and his testimony was a masterpiece of strategic omission and outright lies. He painted Rebecca as a naive traitor whose actions had unleashed a known killer back onto the plains. He twisted her compassion into a criminal act, her medical aid into giving comfort to the enemy. Things looked bleak. The prosecution rested its case, confident of a swift conviction. Then her lawyer called his final witness. To everyone's shock, Corporal Davis walked to the stand. The young soldier, his career on the line, looked directly at the judge. "Mrs. Collins acted from conscience, not disloyalty," he said, his voice clear and steady. "Sir, using children as bait for their father is not a tactic worthy of the United States Army. Mrs. Collins prevented us from dishonoring the uniform." A stunned silence fell over the courtroom. A soldier had just publicly condemned his commanding officer's strategy. The tide had begun to turn. Judge Hamilton, a stern man with eyes that missed nothing, seemed to be weighing not just the law, but the morality of the situation. He asked Rebecca if she'd had any contact with Thunder Horse since her arrest. She told him about the gifts, the public payment of debt. The judge seemed intrigued. He was about to adjourn for the day when a bailiff rushed in with an urgent message. The courtroom buzzed. Judge Hamilton's face grew dark as he read the telegram. "This court has just been informed," he said, his voice grave, "that Lieutenant Warren's patrol was ambushed last night on its return to Fort Carson. There are casualties." The air was sucked out of the room. The prosecutor, Sullivan, was on his feet in an instant. "This attack is the direct consequence of the defendant's actions," he thundered, and then he delivered the final, devastating blow. And according to Lieutenant Warren's sworn report, the Comanche attackers screamed Mrs. Collins's name as they struck. It was a lie, a vicious, brilliant lie. And Rebecca knew in that moment that Warren had just signed her death warrant. She was no longer just a traitor. She was an inspiration for murderers. The judge looked at her, his face unreadable, and she felt the cold steel of the gallows against her neck. The courtroom was in an uproar. Rebecca felt the floor drop out from under her. Warren's lie was a masterstroke of cruelty, perfectly timed to seal her fate. Her lawyer objected furiously, but the damage was done. In the eyes of everyone in that room, her hands were now stained with the blood of American soldiers. Judge Hamilton slammed his gavel, calling for order. But instead of moving toward a verdict, he did something unexpected. "This court will recess for 3 hours," he announced, his eyes like steel chips. I am requesting full, detailed reports from every surviving member of that patrol. The wait was agonizing. Rebecca sat in a holding cell, the world shrinking to the frantic beating of her own heart. When they returned to the courtroom, the atmosphere had shifted. Judge Hamilton sat on the bench, a stack of papers before him, his expression thunderous. I have reviewed the reports, he said, his voice dangerously quiet, and they present significant discrepancies with Lieutenant Warren's initial testimony. He looked directly at the prosecutor. No other survivor of that ambush reports hearing Mrs. Collins's name. Furthermore, the patrol was ambushed nearly 30 miles outside its assigned territory, in a box canyon known for being a poor tactical choice. The pieces clicked into place. Warren hadn't been ambushed. He'd gone hunting, using his own men as bait to try and draw out Thunderhorse, and it had backfired horribly. He had lied under oath to cover his own fatal incompetence and to guarantee her conviction. The judge's gaze was withering. This court, he said, his voice ringing with fury, will not be manipulated by manufactured evidence or personal vendettas. He struck all testimony about the attack from the record. Then he turned to Rebecca. The room held its breath. I find the defendant, Rebecca Collins, guilty of the charge of interfering with military operations. A wave of despair washed over her. It was over. However, the judge continued, his voice dropping, I also find significant mitigating circumstances. Mrs. Collins acted from a humanitarian impulse that this territory claims to uphold. More importantly, her actions seem to have inadvertently opened a channel of communication with a previously hostile tribe. Since the return of his children, Chief Thunderhorse has maintained the peace. The sentence, when it came, was so unexpected it took her a moment to understand it. The defendant is sentenced to time served, the judge declared, followed by 6 months of restricted movement, confined to her property at the Clearwater Trading Post. He wasn't just letting her go home, he was giving her a job. During this period, he finished, looking directly at her, she will provide regular reports to this court regarding any and all Native interactions. This court recognizes that your trading post has become a point of contact. It is in the territory's best interest that this channel remains open. She wasn't a prisoner anymore. She was an ambassador, the most unlikely diplomat the frontier had ever seen. The journey home was surreal. She returned to the trading post a different woman, her life irrevocably changed. Her home was still her prison, with deputies assigned to watch her, but it was also now a sanctuary, an embassy of one. That first night back, Samuel revealed a secret. Thunderhorse's people had been coming in the dead of night, leaving furs and taking supplies in a silent, honor-based trade. They had left another gift, a second carved eagle, a female, a perfect mate to the first, and with it a message, delivered by Rising Star herself, who slipped through the shadows like a ghost. Her father wanted to talk, face to face, alone, at the lightning tree. It was a test, a flagrant violation of her parole, but it was also the only real chance for peace. Marshal Jenkins himself provided the cover, arranging for a lax guard on the chosen night, giving her the territory's unspoken permission to break its own rules. Under a half moon, she rode out. He was waiting for her, a lone figure in the darkness. They weren't a soldier and a settler. They were just two people, from two different worlds, trying to find a path away from war. He spoke of broken treaties and starving children. She spoke of settler fears and the relentless push of a nation that did not understand the word enough. They found a sliver of common ground, an understanding, a beginning. He made a promise. I will maintain the peace, he said, and I will send my daughter Rising Star to your post openly, with a wampum belt of peace for all to see. She will be my messenger. And he was true to his word. The weeks that followed saw a fragile, tentative peace settle over the region. The trading post became what Daniel had always dreamed it would be, a bridge between worlds. Comanche traders came openly in the daylight. The deputies watched, and they wrote their reports, and the war drums fell silent. Then one clear winter afternoon, a delegation arrived. At its head, riding his magnificent paint stallion, was Thunderhorse. He had come not as a warrior, but as a negotiator, ready to talk face to face, in the light of day. Rebecca walked onto her porch to greet him, no longer just a widow, no longer a prisoner. She wore a beaded wristband the children had made for her, a pattern showing two paths merging into one. She had walked through fire, faced down an army, and stood on the brink of a gallows. She had done it all for two children she didn't know, and in doing so, she had stopped a war. The future was uncertain, a trail disappearing into an unknown country. But here today, at this small outpost on the edge of civilization, something extraordinary had happened. A conversation had begun, and for a frontier that had known only the language of violence, that was more than hope. It was a miracle. If this story of courage and connection moved you, you're going to love the two stories waiting for you on the screen right now. They're cut from the same cloth, and you won't want to miss them. Click on one to keep the journey going, and if you haven't already, please subscribe and turn on notifications. You won't regret it.